The items that actually kept families alive during real emergencies aren't the ones anyone talks about online. Most people building a food stockpile start with the same handful of things: a bag of rice, a few cans of beans, some bottled water, maybe a case of soup. That's a reasonable start. Nobody's criticizing it. But if that short list is your entire plan, there's a significant gap between what you have and what you actually need. The people who've genuinely lived through extended hard stretches, not just a long weekend without power, but weeks without normal grocery access after a storm, a layoff that dragged into months, or a winter that shut everything down. Those people will tell you the same thing every single time. It wasn't the big, obvious, well-advertised items that made the difference. It was the small, quiet, so completely unglamorous things near the bottom of the shelf at a regular grocery store. The stuff that sits there week after week, ignored, because it doesn't have a great logo or a YouTube channel dedicated to it. That's exactly what this is about. 9 specific items that serious, experienced preppers keep stocked in serious quantity, that everyday shoppers walk right past without a second look. Not a single one of these requires a specialty website or a bulk food supplier with a minimum order. Every item on this list is available right now at whatever grocery store you already shop at, probably within 20 feet of where you grab your eggs. The catch, and there is always a catch, is that you have to understand what you're actually buying and why it earns its place on a limited shelf. Experience matters here, and the longer you spend thinking about practical food security, the less impressed you get by expensive gear. Freeze-dried meals with a 25-year shelf life are fine if the budget and the closet space are both available. But for most households, neither is unlimited. Most people have one cabinet or half a pantry. The real question is what goes into that small, finite space that actually works under real conditions. The answer is almost never the flashy thing. There's a reason these particular items stay overlooked. It's not because they're secret, it's because they're completely boring. A can of vegetable shortening doesn't photograph well. A box of baking soda doesn't trend on social media. The algorithm and the ad spend chase whatever is expensive, visually interesting, and recently launched. Meanwhile, the items that have literally fed families through every kind of hardship for the past century and a half are still sitting on the same shelves at the same $2 or $3 each, patient and ignored. That ends today. Let's get into them. The first item might feel almost too obvious when you hear it, but hear the reasoning out before you skip past it. Bullion. Chicken, beef, vegetable, it doesn't matter. Cubes, powder, paste, granules, whatever form is cheapest where you shop. The reason bouillon belongs near the top of any serious prep list comes down to something most people underestimate: flavor fatigue. If your long-term food plan is built around rice, dried beans, pasta, and lentils, which is exactly what a sensible, affordable plan should look like, then you are going to be eating a lot of plain, starchy food. Day 1 is fine, and week 1 is tolerable. But by the 3rd week of unseasoned rice and boiled beans, something breaks. Morale starts to crack. People eat less. Children especially start refusing food they'd normally eat without complaint. And when calorie intake drops because the food has become unbearable, the whole situation gets harder fast. Weak people make worse decisions. Irritable people in close quarters create friction. Small problems become large ones. Bouillon addresses this for almost nothing. A single jar of a concentrated paste bouillon, or a box of those small foil-wrapped cubes, can transform 3 dozen plain meals into things that actually taste like something people want to eat. It adds salt, which the body needs. It adds flavor depth, which people need far more than they expect, and it takes up almost no space. Now, in the container the size of a small baby food jar can season a full month of meals. Keeping 3 or 4 varieties on hand, chicken, beef, and a vegetable base at minimum, costs less than $10 total, lasts years unopened, and turns a survival pantry into something resembling a real kitchen. That psychological shift is larger than most people realize until they're in it. When you can still make a bowl of food that tastes like soup instead of boiled starch, something important happens mentally. You feel like a person. You feel like the situation is manageable. That calm matters more than any specialized equipment ever will. There's a practical everyday angle here too. Bullion stretches existing ingredients further than almost anything else. Half a pound of leftover chicken, a cup of rice, 2 vegetables that are starting to turn, and a tablespoon of bouillon paste. That's a pot of soup that feeds a family of 4. Without the flavor anchor, those same ingredients are a depressing, hard-to-finish bowl of protein and starch. With it, that's dinner. In a prolonged stretch where making food last longer than normal is the whole challenge, that one ingredient is doing more work than an entire shelf of specialty prepper items ever would. Stock at least 4 jars, rotate them out. They'll never go to waste, even in normal life. Item 2 is fat. Specifically shelf-stable vegetable shortening. Most people know the Crisco brand. Store brands work equally well. This is, without question, the single most undervalued category in practical food preparedness, and the reason it gets ignored is almost entirely psychological. Shortening doesn't feel like a survival food. It feels like something that used to live in a grandparent's kitchen for pie crust. Look past that association for a moment and consider the actual numbers. 1 tablespoon of solid shortening is roughly 110 calories. A standard 3-pound can contains approximately 12,000 calories. 12,000. That's nearly 6 full days of caloric needs for one adult from a single $10 can that takes up less than a foot of shelf space. Compare that to rice, which delivers around 1,600 calories per pound. You'd need close to 75 pounds of rice to match what 1 can of shortening provides in calories. Rice is genuinely useful, but it's almost entirely carbohydrate. The human body under stress burns through carbohydrates rapidly and then starts demanding fat. Without adequate dietary fat, a person gets cold. Energy crashes, mental clarity drops, weight falls faster than it should. Children's immune function weakens noticeably. None of that is speculation. It's documented in nearly every serious study of prolonged food shortages throughout recorded history. Fat is not optional. It's not a luxury. It is a physiological requirement, and vegetable shortening delivers it in the most calorie-dense, shelf-stable, unique affordable form available at a regular grocery store. Stock it. The second reason shortening deserves serious shelf space has nothing to do with eating it. A standard can of solid shortening with a cotton wick set into it functions as a candle that burns steadily for somewhere around 45 days. 45 days of light and a modest amount of ambient heat from a single can of baking fat. The process couldn't be simpler. Remove the lid or punch a small hole in the center of it. Take a strip of cotton fabric, a piece of an old shoelace, a twisted length of cotton cloth, anything made of natural fiber will work, and push it straight down into the fat until about 1/4 of an inch remains above the surface. Light it. The fat wicks upward and burns cleanly with minimal smoke for as long as the fuel lasts. When you're done using it as a light source, remove the wick, stir the remaining fat smooth, and resume cooking with it. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is ruined. A third application worth knowing: shortening works for chapped skin and cracked hands in dry or cold conditions, as a waterproofing agent for leather boots, as a lubricant for hinges and mechanical parts, and as a base ingredient for basic soap if you ever have reason to make your own. One can, 6 legitimate uses. Most people don't own any because they never thought of fat as something to store. That's the gap. Fill it. Item 3 is raw honey. Ideally local, but any pure honey without additives or high fructose corn syrup, adulterating it, will do the job. Honey holds a distinction that almost no other food can claim. It genuinely does not spoil. This sealed honey recovered from ancient Egyptian burial sites, thousands of years old, has been tested and found chemically edible. The combination of low moisture content and natural acidity creates conditions where bacteria are simply unable to establish and grow. A jar of honey bought today, stored in a cool, dark place, will still be perfectly good for the people who inherit whatever you leave behind. That shelf life alone puts it in a category with almost nothing else. Beyond permanence, honey is immediate, clean-burning energy. Roughly 60 calories per tablespoon of easily digested fuel that the body processes efficiently. It has well-documented traditional applications for minor burns, shallow cuts, and sore throats, where its natural antibacterial properties provide genuine benefit. Military field hospitals in the early 20th century used honey dressings on wounds when pharmaceutical options ran out, and the practice remained in use in parts of the world for decades afterward because it worked. Practically speaking, honey turns food that people tolerate into food people actually want. Plain oats with honey become breakfast someone looks forward to. Plain bread with honey becomes a treat that matters. In a household with children, that distinction is not small. A few pounds of honey on a shelf takes up almost no space. Costs somewhere between $8 and $15 depending on the size and source, and earns that space back through caloric density, morale value, medicinal application, and indefinite shelf life simultaneously. Few items on this list or any other accomplish that many things at once. Item 4 is vinegar. White distilled vinegar specifically, though apple cider vinegar has its own set of uses and is worth keeping separately. A gallon jug of white distilled vinegar costs roughly $3. The applications for that $3 jug extend into the kitchen, the medicine cabinet, the cleaning supply closet, and well beyond. In preservation, vinegar is essential. Pickling extends the shelf life of vegetables, eggs, and proteins by months or years without refrigeration. If you ever have a garden producing more than you can eat, or access to produce that would otherwise go to waste, vinegar is the ingredient that turns that surplus into shelf-stable food. Without it, extra food rots. With it, extra food lasts. For cleaning, white vinegar handles grease, mineral deposits, soap scum, and odors without leaving residue or requiring any secondary rinsing. It descales kettles and coffee equipment, cleans glass without streaking, and deodorizes drains and fabrics. 1 gallon does the work of several different commercial cleaning products at a fraction of the cost and without the storage space those products require. In wound care, diluted vinegar addresses fungal infections and acts as a mild disinfectant for minor cuts and abrasions when nothing else is immediately available. It relieves the itch of mild sunburn and insect stings when applied directly. It's not a medical product, and it's not a substitute for actual medication when medication is needed. But for the low-grade daily annoyances that never fully stop regardless of circumstances, vinegar handles them without requiring a pharmacy. $3 a gallon, buy several. Item 5 is iodized salt. Not sea salt, not pink Himalayan, not specialty finishing salt. Plain iodized table salt in the largest container you can find for the smallest amount of money. This one seems almost too basic to mention, but the iodized distinction specifically matters enormously and gets ignored constantly. Plain salt, without added iodine, has been the standard for most of human history. Iodine was added to table salt in the early 1920s after large portions of the population in landlocked regions developed serious thyroid conditions, including goiter, from iodine deficiency. The fortification program worked dramatically well, and the problem largely disappeared from public awareness. But the problem didn't disappear because the need for iodine went away. It disappeared because iodized salt became the default. If your diet during a prolonged emergency shifts away from the broad variety of modern food toward a narrower set of shelf-stable staples, and it will, iodine is one of the micronutrients most likely to become insufficient. Thyroid dysfunction develops slowly and presents ambiguously. Fatigue, cold sensitivity, cognitive slowness, weight changes. It's easy to attribute those symptoms to stress or circumstances rather than nutrition. By the time it's obvious, it's been going on for a while. Plain iodized salt costs almost nothing. A 26-ounce container is usually around $1. That same container, stored sealed in a dry location, will last effectively forever. Salt is also a preservation ingredient, a flavor foundation, a cleaning abrasive, and a historically significant trade commodity. Stock at least 10 pounds of iodized table salt. It will all eventually get used regardless of what the world does. Item 6 is powdered milk. Full fat if you can find it, though low fat is far more widely available and still worthwhile. Powdered milk is one of the most nutritionally complete, shelf-stable items available at a standard grocery store. Calcium, protein, fat-soluble vitamins, complete amino acid profile. In a diet that has narrowed toward grains and legumes, powdered milk contributes nutrients that are genuinely difficult to replace from pantry items alone. The objection most people raise is taste. Reconstituted powdered milk doesn't taste like fresh milk out of a refrigerator. That is true and not the point. Mixed at the correct ratio, kept cold if refrigeration exists, and used in cooking rather than drunk straight, powdered milk functions essentially identically to fresh milk. It makes oatmeal creamier. It makes baked goods work properly. It makes a white sauce possible. It makes scrambled eggs from powder taste closer to actual scrambled eggs. For households with children, powdered milk is specifically important. Children's calcium needs during development don't pause because circumstances have changed. A growing child needs protein and calcium in quantities that grain-heavy diets simply don't supply on their own. A canister of powdered milk on the shelf is direct insurance against a nutritional gap that would otherwise be very difficult to address from a limited pantry. It stores for 2 to 10 years, depending on packaging and conditions. Buy more than you think you need. Item 7 is yeast. Specifically active dry yeast, stored sealed and refrigerated if possible, or at minimum, kept in a cool location away from light and humidity. Yeast is the fermentation catalyst that separates flour from bread. Without it, a stockpile heavy in wheat and flour will produce flatbreads and crackers and nothing else. That's a meaningful gap. Bread is more than calories. It is one of the most psychologically significant foods in virtually every culture with a history of grain agriculture. The smell of baking bread in a difficult stretch changes something in a household that is difficult to quantify but impossible to overstate. The presence of real, risen bread rather than hard tack communicates normalcy in a way that matters deeply to people under extended stress. Active dry yeast, stored in its original sealed packaging in a sealed container in a cool location, remains viable for 2 to 4 years. Vacuum sealed and kept cold, long. A simple test. Dissolve a small amount in warm water with a pinch of sugar. If it foams within 10 minutes, it's active. If nothing happens, it's spent. Keep extra. Rotate it. The shelf life is finite in a way that most items on this list are not, which means it requires a bit more attention. But the payoff? A functioning bread baking capability from a pantry of shelf-stable ingredients is worth the management. Sourdough starter is worth mentioning here as a backup. A maintained sourdough culture requires nothing except flour, water, and consistent feeding. It can replace commercial yeast indefinitely for anyone willing to learn the process. It's not complicated. Millions of households maintained sourdough starters for generations before commercial yeast existed. The starter itself becomes a prep item with no expiration date. But if sourdough feels like a project you won't realistically take on, keep a good supply of active dry yeast and rotate it consistently. Item 8 is sugar, and hard candy belongs in this same conversation because they serve closely related purposes, and both get overlooked in ways that eventually cost people. Plain white granulated sugar, stored in a sealed container away from moisture, does not spoil. It may clump in humid conditions, which is solved by breaking it apart or briefly warming it. A 25-pound bag from a warehouse store costs around $15 and takes up roughly the same shelf space as 2 or 3 hardcover books. The direct applications are obvious: sweetening, baking, preserving. Sugar plus heat plus jars produces jam, preserved fruit, and syrups that last a year or more on a shelf. If you ever have a productive garden or access to surplus produce, sugar is how you keep it. Without sugar, that surplus has a hard deadline. With it, the surplus becomes an asset. But the morale argument for sugar deserves its own moment, because it's the piece that gets dismissed as soft and then turns out to be critical. Adults under prolonged stress have developed coping mechanisms over decades. They can get through a difficult day on willpower and context. Children have not developed those mechanisms yet. For a child, a hard stretch of uncomfortable, stressful, disrupted days without any small comfort or pleasure is genuinely destabilizing in ways that affect behavior, sleep, appetite, and resilience across the entire household. A piece of hard candy after dinner, a spoon of sugar in morning tea, a sweet biscuit on a Sunday. These are not indulgences. They are investments in the emotional stability of the people you're responsible for, and the emotional stability of those people affects everything else. Hard candy specifically earns a separate call-out. Butterscotch discs, peppermints, lemon drops, individually wrapped, stored in a cool, dry location, last for years. They take up almost no space. In a situation involving barter, which is not a primary planning assumption, but is worth holding as a secondary consideration, hard candy is surprisingly valuable. It's lightweight, universally appealing, difficult to find in disrupted supply chains, and a $3 bag from any convenience store represents real value in that context. Stock sugar. Stock a few bags of hard candy. Use the sugar in daily baking and rotation so it never sits static. Using the candy you can tuck into the back of a shelf and mostly forget about. Item 9 is the cheapest item on the entire list, and possibly the most versatile thing that exists for $1. Baking soda. A 1-pound box costs roughly $1 at any grocery store and performs somewhere around 50 different practical functions in a household. In the kitchen, baking soda is a leavening agent. Pancakes, biscuits, soda bread, cornbread, anything that needs to rise quickly without yeast depends on baking soda. If your long-term pantry is built heavily on flour and grain, as any practical pantry should be, you need a leavening agent that doesn't require the careful management that yeast does. Baking soda is that agent. It reacts with acidic ingredients including buttermilk, yogurt, vinegar, or lemon juice to produce carbon dioxide, which is what makes baked goods rise. No temperature management, no proofing time. Just mix and bake. That simplicity is the point. For cleaning, baking soda is one of the most capable and universally applicable substances in any household. It scrubs pots and surfaces without scratching them, deodorizes refrigerators and trash containers, cleans bathtubs and tile grout, freshens carpets by allowing it to sit and then vacuuming it up, and handles roughly half the tasks that normally require an entirely separate cleaning product for each one. A box that costs $1 replaces several items that each cost 5 or 10. For basic hygiene, baking soda has been used as a functional toothpaste and deodorant for generations. It is not a modern discovery. It is an old, reliable, well-proven method that works without anything else required. If standard personal care products become unavailable or limited, a box of baking soda in the bathroom handles the fundamentals without any complexity or specialty sourcing. For minor first aid, a paste made from baking soda and water reduces the irritation of insect bites and mild contact rashes. A small amount dissolved in a glass of water settles acid indigestion effectively. Neither application replaces actual medical care when actual medical care is what's needed, but for the constant, low-level, physical annoyances that accumulate daily regardless of circumstances, baking soda handles a significant portion of them at no meaningful cost. One final application that almost nobody mentions, but is worth knowing clearly. Baking soda extinguishes small grease fires. If cooking oil ignites on a camp stove or a regular burner, the correct response is never water. Water causes burning oil to splatter and the fire to expand rapidly. The correct response is to pour baking soda directly onto the flames. The chemical reaction smothers the fire immediately and cleanly. A box sitting near any cooking area, whether during normal life or during an emergency involving alternative fuel sources, is a low-cost fire safety measure with a straightforward application that could prevent a minor mishap from becoming a serious one. On storage, standard cardboard boxes are adequate for normal household rotation. For longer-term storage of extra boxes, place them inside a sealed freezer bag with the air pressed out. Baking soda actively absorbs surrounding odors, which is useful when it's sitting in your refrigerator, pulling in old smells, and genuinely harmful when it's been stored adjacent to vinegar or strong cleaning products for an extended period. Sealed, it stays neutral and fully functional for decades. $1, one small box, a cooking ingredient, a cleaning supply, a hygiene product, a minor first aid tool, and a fire extinguisher for small grease fires. 6 boxes on a shelf is $6. You'll rotate through them in normal life without even trying. So that's the complete list. Bullion, shortening, honey, vinegar, iodized salt, powdered milk, yeast, sugar with hard candy, and baking soda. 9 items. Look at what they have in common. Not one of them is expensive. Not one requires a specialty store or a bulk food website or any specialized knowledge to purchase. Every single one is available right now at a regular grocery store for a few dollars per container, jar, or bag. And every single one of them delivers multiple uses, a long shelf life, serious calorie density, or some combination of all three. They earn their shelf space 2 and 3 times over. That's the standard every item in a practical pantry should meet. The mindset that actually produces resilience is not about volume. It's not about buying a mountain of things. It's about buying smart. The households that are genuinely, practically prepared, the ones that have been quietly doing this for years, don't own warehouses. They own a closet, but that closet contains items that each do 3 jobs instead of 1, that last a decade instead of a month, and that cost $2 instead of $20. That's the shift. That's what separates practical preparedness from expensive performance. Starting from this week, try walking through the grocery store with a slightly different lens. Not just asking what sounds good for dinner, but asking what on this shelf earns its place in 3 different ways. What stays useful for 10 years? What costs $2 and replaces something that costs $20? What item am I walking past every week that would quietly transform my household's resilience if I just owned 4 of them? That question, asked consistently over time, is the entire practice of practical preparedness. It doesn't require a dramatic lifestyle change. It doesn't require a large budget or a dedicated room. The most prepared families anyone has ever met didn't arrive at that state because of one large purchasing event. They got there because they added one useful item per shopping trip for years. A jar here, a canister there, a 10-pound bag of flour when it went on sale. Over months and years, those small, unremarkable purchases quietly accumulated into something genuinely substantial. If you walked into a normal grocery store today with $25 and picked up a jar of bouillon paste, a can of shortening, a bag of sugar, a large container of iodized salt, 2 boxes of baking soda, a jar of honey, a packet of active dry yeast, and a gallon of white vinegar, you would spend roughly $25. You would leave with about $25 worth of groceries. But you would have quietly, practically, and meaningfully upgraded your household's resilience in ways that would still be paying off years from now. That's $25 doing more actual work than most of what $25 gets spent on in a given week. Small, consistent actions compound over time. That is the whole method. There is no second method hidden somewhere else. The best preparedness is the kind that actually happens, and it happens one grocery run at a time. If this video gave you something useful, hit the like button for my channel. It helps more people find this content than you'd probably guess, and it takes about 2 seconds. Drop a comment below with one overlooked item you already stock that you think deserves to be on a list like this. Those comments are genuinely read, and many of the best ideas that have made their way into videos over the years came directly from people in the comments sharing what works for them. Preparedness is not rooted in fear. It's rooted in the specific, practical peace of mind that comes from knowing the basics are handled. Take care of yourself.